So if we don't know the problem, if we don't really know what the problem is, we don't really know how to remedy a problem. And one thing that Ajama Baraka from the Black Alliance for Peace, who was the 2016 presidential run with Dr. Jill Stein, he was talking about today about the white supremacist colonialist project, and he called it a sophisticated patriarchal white supremacist colonialist project. And he said basically he was indicating that we ignore it at our own peril. And he talked about how he's not talking about the cartoonish type, Trump and the insurrectionists that are sort of cartoonish as well, even though he said that they were dangerous. But he's not talking about that. He's actually talking about how with Biden there's a sophisticated attempts to basically continue on and revive that white supremacist colonialist capitalist project. He said that basically Biden was reviving collective imperialism and making European values at the center. So all nations everywhere, he would like to see, and the US empire would like to see all nations everywhere basically mimicking European values. He said white supremacy is not reducible to gender or race. For example, Obama was a white supremacist, and the Democratic Party is a white supremacist party. And he said the way the collective imperialist white supremacist colonialist capitalist project, and that's a mouthful, maintains itself is through state violence, and it's through NATO and these huge obscene military budgets, and the creation of the 1033 program domestically, which is the militarization of the police. Police are being trained by Israeli IDF. So you can imagine how militarized police have become so brutal and without conscience, if you've ever seen the way the IDF treat Palestinians. And that's why these struggles are closely connected, Black Lives Matter and Palestinian rights, because of this kind of thing. It's all connected. So when they get trained by the Israeli Defense Forces, or I should say the occupation forces, these are the many ways that this capitalist class, continue on and by force and through violence, maintaining their hegemony, maintaining their grip on any opposing people's movements, basically. It's a way of maintaining white supremacy through force and violence. And I'm going to show you a clip soon, but I wanted to just basically outline a few of the things he said. It's not everything he said, but I think his views on these issues are, well, obviously he's a black left activist, and of course that black and brown people in the US are the most oppressed, and we need to recognize that this is something that is global, and that's why we need to be intersectionalists. And he said that there's a war against colonized people globally, and that when we understand the terms of this, we can strategize, because the state at the present time, and you can see it all the time basically now, particularly in the US, the state in the US has a crisis of legitimacy. It's all over the place. It's basically transparently bad at this point, and you only have to see the way Biden has abandoned the $15 minimum wage even now. And they're also reducing, they're means testing this COVID stimulus package for people, and lying about the $2,000. And there's going to be more and more of these failures. He won't give Medicare for all to the public, even in a pandemic. They're basically making people struggle and be so oppressed in a way, financially and otherwise, that they're not paying attention to the capitalist class, the 1%, the corporate-owned media and all of that, that we're too busy trying to struggle to survive. That's one of the reasons why he does it. The other reason is he doesn't care about the masses, and another reason is that he makes people so poverty-stricken that they will do anything for work. They will work for any amount of money. And of course, they've gone from promising to bring in $15, which is way below what they should be doing as a minimum wage. It should be somewhere like $24 or something. They're doing $15. They've actually decided to abandon that. It was going to be $20.25, which was bad enough, and now they're going to abandon it altogether, it looks like. So that is the kind of SHIT show that the US has going on. So the state has a crisis of legitimacy, and so that's why they go further and further to becoming a neo-fascist sort of a force, basically, a neo-fascist establishment. Like Lenin has said, fascism is capitalism in decay. And neoliberalism, Ajama Baraka said, is an expression of fascism. What Joe Biden is attempting to do, he said, Ajama Baraka said, is re-establish white supremacy in an acceptable form, because Donald Trump basically really was the empire with the mask torn off. He was very, very crass. He was impulsive and all over the place, even though he did all the biddings of the US national security state in terms of continuing on these wars and increasing the carnage. But he still was crass, and they need some kind of a smooth operator. They don't need anybody who's remotely progressive like Bernie Sanders. They need someone who's going to do their bidding, do whatever they want him to do, or her. And when Joe Biden conks out, and it looks like he will within the next year, I mean, when you watched him going off the stage twice when he did the foreign policy speech, they had to kind of help corral him off the stage. He was going to the left, and then he was walking off in the wrong direction, and I noticed they all started, including Kamala Harris, started corralling him off stage. I mean, this is how poorly his health is, his mental health, etc. So I know they can see it coming. They're just trying to basically keep him in there for as long as possible before they put Kamala Harris in. So basically, Ajama Baraka was saying that both parties, both the duopolies, basically committed to the policy of full spectrum dominance through militarism. And he said the hubris and the arrogance of the US, which has divided the planet up into global command structures, which is disgusting. And one of them is AFRICOM. It was commenced in 2008, just before Obama got in. And then the US has military to military contact and has basically been training the police across the African continent. He said, we all need to understand, particularly black people, need to understand what capitalism is, and we need to make connections between what's happening domestically and what's happening globally. So basically, he said, we need to understand imperialism, we need to understand colonialism, we need to understand capitalism, and we obviously need to be anti-capitalist. For there to be a real revolution, and this is my words, and this is echoed often by other people, for there to be a real revolution, we have to be anti-capitalist. Capitalism cannot work, really. That's the bottom line. We need to be anti-capitalist. It's not working, it's ecocidal, and it's inherently exploitative. Biden wants basically to maintain the hegemony of US capital. He wants to make capital more effective, to exploit the land and people more effectively. So he basically said, when we expose the greed of these rapacious, and he calls them freaks, it will be the dismantlement of the US colonialist state and, in fact, the West. So, I mean, that sounds good to me. I mean, that's why, despite the fact that I live in Australia, through, watching independent leftist journalism, I realized that the US empire, and this is basically, I'd say, breaking the set with Abby Martin was really what opened my eyes, but US empire needs to be dismantled. It needs to fall, and the way to do it is to completely expose it. And that's becoming harder and harder as these governments become more neo-fascist and are trying to basically crush dissent and crush any sort of information that would expose them. But once they're exposed, there's no real turning back. Once enough of the public see it for what it is, and more it's becoming a calamitous sort of a SHIT show. It's really, really everything that it does almost at the moment is ridiculous. And I think, except for the people who are complete diehard blue corporate Democrats, or basically ideologues of the Democratic Party, anybody who is not that can see things are really bad and can see the state for what it is. It's completely abandoned the public, really. I mean, look, there's even poison water in Flint and elsewhere, and they won't do anything about it. And anytime corporations do something outrageous, they either file for bankruptcy or they do something else, and they continue on. Look at Johnson & Johnson, that corporation, Johnson & Johnson, a multi-billion dollar corporation. It basically had asbestos in talc powder, basically destroying the lives of many women, getting ovarian cancer, and probably lots of babies, basically. I mean, that Johnson & Johnson's baby powder has been used worldwide for decades now. So who knows how many people have died of either lung conditions or ovarian cancer or whatever due to the asbestos in Johnson & Johnson baby powder. And here they are providing the COVID vaccines, and probably going to make billions and billions and billions of dollars They shouldn't even be in existence after knowing that there was asbestos in their baby powder and continued on selling it and covering it up. You know, this is how it is now, basically. The corporations get away with whatever they want. There's a little tap on the wrist, and the people suffer constantly in the US. And, you know, and this is a worldwide thing. It's becoming a worldwide thing where corporations inverted totalitarian states where the corporations basically run the show. So, you know, this is why we need a robust, independent, leftist media to basically expose US empire, expose the establishment and the kleptocracy, so that the people can see it for what it is. People need to, the general public that is completely propagandized, most of them, need to see this for what it is, and they need to care about this as well. There are people who do not care about people of color, black people, etc., and they're quite happy for these imperialist wars to continue on with these people that call themselves progressive, that barely mention, if ever, imperialist wars. They're not leftists, and I wish people would stop calling them the left. You know, the system can't be reformed, and that includes capitalism. The system cannot be reformed. It can't be revamped. We have to take power away from the corporate capitalists and give it back to the people.
In fact, what we're seeing from the state is a move to constrain and to constrict political analysis, alternative information, to impose on us an ideological conformity that in fact supports and sustains the neoliberal project. So our desire to jettison this more traditional and stereotypical kind of fascist, represented by the authoritarianism and cartoonish character of Donald Trump, may be setting us up to not recognize even more insidious and perhaps dangerous move being made by the state to usher in a form of neo-fascism that we inadvertently can support or will support by having our attention diverted away from that threat. And what I mean by that is this, that basically when we recognize and remember that neoliberalism is a form of fascism. Neoliberalism, and our dear professor is going to talk about this more in a moment. But, you know, neoliberalism came in on the back of a fascist move in Chile. It is a rightist tendency. It is the terroristic coordination of society on behalf of big capital. It is a system that combines and converges capital, big capital, and the state. And as a consequence of that, it is threatened by any kind of upsurge from the people. So what we have to be very careful of is not recognizing that as a consequence of this capitalist crisis, and we have to understand that you can't understand neoliberalism and neo-fascism abstracted from capitalism. There's a consequence of this capitalist crisis that the state is moving to address its legitimation crisis by strengthening the national security state. So this space that we thought we might have, I think is under threat. And therefore we have to be absolutely clear about how we move, absolutely clear about our relationship to the state, our understanding of the state, our understanding of the social and class forces that are supporting the neoliberal Democrats. Because what we can find ourselves inadvertently doing is in fact giving political cover to this move by neoliberal fascism at this critical moment. So, you know, the analysis is something we have to continue to grapple with. We have to talk about the kinds and forms of organizations that we have to begin to build to address this critical moment, because the objective reality is this: the contradictions of this colonial capitalist order will continue to deepen. The redundancy that African people, the African working class and other people of color, the other colonized people in this country face will continue to deepen. The fiscal crisis that this state is facing will result in severe suffering on the parts of millions of people here in this country and globally. So we have to be prepared for this kind of struggle that we have to engage in, and we have to continue these kinds of conversations to talk about the kinds of organized resistance we have to engage in, and we have to remind ourselves too, and I close here with this comment, that the key, beyond organization, of course, the key is effectively engaging in the struggle over ideals, to understand that the terrain of consciousness is a contested terrain, and that we've got to understand the challenges of the ideological struggle that we are involved in, because the state understands that, and they are putting into place mechanisms to ensure that the only acceptable views and ideals that will be allowed to be disseminated are those ideals that uphold the capitalist state and the settler colonial project. The structural manifestation, the political expression of the white supremacist colonial capitalist patriarchy that developed once Europe spilled out of its boundaries in 1492 and invaded the Americas, creating the material basis for its eventual global hegemony. What we are seeing today, as Joe Biden talks about the need for unity and reestablishing relationships between the US and Europe, is his attempt to rehabilitate or revive, if you will, some of the relationships that were not severed, but under pressure as the Trump forces advanced their America First project that exposed the tensions and contradictions between the US-based capitalists and the global, the transnational finance and corporate capital. That project that Joe Biden is attempting to revive is a project of white supremacy. It is a project that says that the only way that the pan-European project will survive is if we find a way to work together again, to re-embrace the concept that Kwame Nkrumah talked about, collective imperialism under the leadership of the U.S. That's why they say that Joe Biden is a transatlanticist. But we have to unpack that and expose it. We have to see, we have to identify for what it is. It is a white supremacist project. And that's why this notion of white supremacy is so fundamentally important. And I'm not talking about the cartoonish understanding of white supremacy that the clownish activities of some of these militias, as dangerous as they might be, that correspond to our sort of simplistic understanding of what a racist is supposed to be. I'm talking about the more sophisticated white supremacy, the white supremacist ideology that sees Europe as the apex of civilization, that sees European culture as the most developed culture of the globe, and that sees something that we refer to as modernization, as the inevitable ending point of all people, and that all nations and all people should strive to mimic and try to be like Europe. Okay, those notions of white supremacy, that white supremacist ideology is something that is not reducible to race or ethnicity, gender, or anything else. Okay, that's why we say that Barack Obama is a white supremacist. That's why we say that the Democratic Party is a white supremacist party. So the attempt by Joe Biden is to rehabilitate that project. And at the center of that project, this is what we have to remind ourselves. The center of this white supremacist colonial capitalist project, the mechanism by which it enforces itself and maintains its hegemony, is state violence. The embracing of this white supremacist structure called NATO, the enhancement of the US ability to wage war with these obscene military budgets, the creation of the Department of Defense 1033 program domestically, That is the program responsible for militarizing police forces across this country. The Israeli training of police forces. All of these are the structural expressions of this commitment to maintaining white supremacy through force. We've got to understand that and recognize that. Understand that war is being waged against us in this country and globally, not just against African people, but against all colonized people. When we understand the terms of struggle, and then the strategies become more clear. So we in the Black Alliance of Peace, we try to be clear. We say basically, when we came together and launched this thing in 2017, we understood the trajectory of U.S. politics. We understood that the crisis of legitimacy was only going to continue to deepen. And we knew that as a consequence of that, the state would be more dependent on the use of force and violence. And we had to prepare our people for that. So this move by Donald Trump, not Donald Trump, the same thing, Joe Biden is a move to reestablish white supremacy, but in a more acceptable form. Well, we've got to unpack it. We've have to expose it. Look, both parties are committed to the idea of full spectrum dominance. At the center of full spectrum dominance is militarism. Okay, so the war being waged against African people and colonized people in this country, in the U.S. domestically, is part of the global process of attempting to try to maintain a global white supremacist imperialism. And that is the connection that we have to continually make. Most people don't even know, for example, how the U.S. has divided up the entire planet into these global command structures, the arrogance of these people. And one of the main command structures that we've been attempting to highlight in the Black Alliance of Peace's work is the U.S. Africa Command, a command that was created October 1st, 2008, right before the ascendancy of your first Black president, and expanded under that person 2,400%. The footprint on the African continent is massive. 53 out of the 54 states on the African continent have military relations in military to military relation with the U.S. The U.S. is training police forces across the African continent. And these are some of the same kinds of comprador and neoliberal puppets that are fronting for white power on the continent that we have in the U.S. The same kind of neoliberal comprador puppets fronting for white power across the country in all of these Democrat-controlled cities. Okay, so we make those connections politically, and we make those connections in terms of the role of the state. So these are the things we have to make, and we have to articulate these things in clear, unambiguous language. And that's why I'm so happy about this conversation tonight, because folks are laying it out in clear terms. And this is exactly what we have to do. We look, time out for any kind of vagueness. Our people will understand what we're up against. They'll understand what capitalism is. They will understand what is imperialism. They'll understand what is colonialism. But we've got to be prepared with the language and the vocabulary and the skills to engage our folks. Okay, but that is the historic responsibility right now, folks. If we're not talking about building a revolutionary response, a revolutionary movement here in this country, that basically we just propping up, upholding white supremacy. Biden wants to maintain the hegemony of U.S. capital. He wants to be able to make U.S. capital more effective. He wants to reposition U.S. capitalists to be able to more effectively exploit the land, resources, and labor of people globally. The creation of the West is as a consequence of colonial exploitation. So yes, those connections we make, and when we begin to shift power from this rapacious class, this greedy, rapacious class, the rapacious greed of these freaks, it will end up being the dismantlement of the U.S. colonial state and in fact, the West. You can't have it both ways. There's no way that we're going to be able to, we're not going to reform this, especially when we talk about and understand this basis, that basically we're not prepared for authentic decolonization, which means completely revamping this state, taking power away from these corporate capitalists and bringing that power to the people. Then you're not really prepared for liberation, because that's the only way that we're able to free ourselves and, in fact, free the world. A concrete example of how white supremacy is normalized. The very fact that people in the U.S. can support the notion that the U.S. state has a right and a responsibility to determine the leadership of other nations like Venezuela is, to me, a concrete manifestation of that ideology. You know, the same argument that they made concerned about Russian interference and all of that, you know, they don't understand that basically, you know, there's a connection between that and their so-called concern about and their attempt to assert themselves on nations like Venezuela. And the logic that one can use that they asserted around Donald Trump could have been used again when Donald Trump contested the election. And if another country like the Russians or whoever decided that they were going to recognize Donald Trump as the legitimate president, then the rationale was consistent. It's the same thing that they have done in Venezuela and other places. But the fact that these things are not connected and that people don't seem to even recognize it, to me, is a concrete manifestation of the assumptions of white privilege and white supremacy. It's so incredibly important to see folks who understand the absolute necessity for us to bring back into the center of discourse the issue of imperialism, and to encourage people to embrace an anti-imperialist position. It is a major contradiction in this country for people to be able to identify themselves as so-called radicals, but yet never say a mumbling word about U.S. imperialism. So that's one thing that we have to do, that we have a responsibility, I believe, being at the center of empire, to in fact be in solidarity with the struggling people around the globe, understanding that in that kind of solidarity, it only strengthens all of us, that we're not going to be able to address the contradictions we're facing in the U.S. while understanding that we're part of one global system, and that we've got to be in solidarity with all people who are struggling against our common enemy. And we share a common vision in terms of where we need to go as collective humanity. So we say in the Black is Back Coalition and the Black Alliance for Peace that we must turn imperialist wars into wars against imperialism. And the only way we do that, my friends, is by organizing ourselves and doing the deep base building work that we've been suggesting and implying here this evening. So support and join dissenters, support and join the Black Alliance for Peace, get into organizations, take up the task of engaging our people in political dialogue, communicate the responsibility that we all have to be organized, but also help everyone to understand that organized, conscious, it may be a cliche, but the people are undefeated. And that sense of inspiration, that sense of our task is something we've got to talk about. We've got to center that and tell people that the degradation and dehumanization that we are subjected to in this backward and barbaric system, it can be altered, can be eliminated, that there is, in fact, a difference, that we can transcend this. So let's inspire each other, support each other, and let's communicate to the people that, in fact, we can win.